Every government insists its money is strong. Every finance minister swears the currency is sound, and when things begin to break, they all reach for the same weapon first. Not interest rates, not capital controls, language. They change the name of what is happening, not the reality of it. In November 1967, Britain did not announce a currency collapse. It announced a necessary realignment. The pound wasn't being debased, it was being made competitive. And in one of the most famous lines in economic history, the Prime Minister told the nation that the pound in your pocket had not been devalued at all. But if the pound was suddenly worth less abroad, if imports instantly became more expensive, if Britain's global purchasing power dropped in a single weekend, what exactly does not devalued mean? What survives, the symbol or the substance? Sterling in 1967 is not just a story about a mid-century currency crisis. It is a lesson in how states handle the moment when arithmetic finally overrules pride, and how words are used to anesthetize a population during a transfer of wealth it never voted for and barely understands. For centuries, the British pound was more than metal and paper. It was an emblem of the empire. A merchant in India, a banker in New York, a trader in Buenos Aires, all understood that sterling was not just a currency, but a statement. It said, London is the center. British credit is unquestioned. Contracts written in pounds are as good as gold. Around 1900, that belief was almost reasonable. Sterling was tied to gold. British banks financed trade across continents. The Royal Navy enforced the rules of the game, and those rules were written in English. A British citizen could look at a pound note and feel that it rested on solid foundations. Gold in the vault, colonies under the flag, industry humming in the factories. Then the 20th century arrived and submitted the imperial balance sheet to a brutal audit. 2 world wars drained Britain's finances. Vast loans were taken. Gold reserves were sold. The country that had once been the world's great creditor quietly became a debtor, even as it tried to pretend nothing fundamental had changed. Between the wars, the gold standard broke. After the Second World War, the empire itself began to unwind. India left. Colonies moved toward independence. The United States took over as the central pillar of the global financial system. On paper, the pound still mattered. Under the Bretton Woods system, sterling was fixed at a set rate to the US dollar, and the dollar was in turn tied to gold. Britain was a founding member of this new order. Sterling was one of the main reserve currencies, but under the surface, something had shifted. The numbers no longer supported the story. Britain now faced the costs of rebuilding its bombed cities, funding a new welfare state, maintaining military commitments abroad, and managing the slow, painful end of its imperial role. These demands pulled money outward. At the same time, the country was trying to hold its currency at a level that flattered its sense of status. That required money to flow in. Reality did not cooperate. Economists called the result stop-go policy. When growth picked up, people imported more. The trade deficit widened. Pressure built on the pound. Speculators began to doubt the fixed rate. To defend the currency, the government would slam on the brakes, higher taxes, cuts in spending. Credit squeezed, wages frozen, growth stalled, unemployment rose, import demand fell. For a moment, the numbers improved. Then, as soon as the pressure eased, there would be a new push for growth. The cycle repeated. Behind the technical jargon sat a simple hierarchy of values. The prestige of sterling was placed above the comfort of citizens. The symbol of strength took priority over the experience of ordinary people. The state could accept higher unemployment. It could accept slower growth. It could accept social tension. But a formal reduction in the pound's external value, a public admission of decline, was treated as a humiliation to be avoided at almost any cost. That attitude had already been tested once. In 1949, sterling was devalued from $4, or $3 to $2.80, a cut of about 30%. It was a painful admission that Britain could not sustain the illusion of pre-war strength. Prices rose. Britain's trading position shifted. The word devaluation became loaded with shame. For many politicians who had lived through that moment, repeating it would be an admission that the country had learned nothing and fallen even lower. By the early 1960s, the global environment was changing again. Europe was recovering rapidly. Germany and France were becoming export powerhouses. Japan was on the rise. Former colonies were seeking their own industrial paths. The pound was caught in a squeeze between the memory of the empire and the competitive reality of a new world. In 1964, Harold Wilson's Labour government came to power, promising modernization. The mantra was about bringing the white heat of technology into British industry, raising productivity, and reforming a tired economic structure. But there was another unspoken promise: no more devaluation. The government would defend the pound's value at $2.80. That pledge became almost sacred. From that moment, British economic policy became a duel between two forces: political pride and mathematical inevitability. Every trade deficit, every wave of speculative selling, every emergency loan from foreign central banks tightened the noose around sterling's throat. Each time, the government rushed out new measures: cuts in public spending, tax increases, a wage and price freeze, negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, behind-the-scenes pleas for support from American and European partners. Public statements struck a different tone. The situation was challenging but under control. The pound was being defended. There was no question of devaluation. That phrase appeared so often in official speeches that it almost became a spell, repeated in the hope that repetition alone could hold back the tide. Markets do not listen to spells. They listen to numbers. Traders watched Britain's export performance, its import bill, its budget deficits. They saw a government trying to do too many things at once: sustain a generous social model, keep troops abroad, defend an overvalued currency, and promise growth. Something had to give. The most vulnerable link was the exchange rate. Currency crises are quieter than bank runs, but just as ruthless. There are no crowds outside branches. Instead, there are phones in dealing rooms, telex messages, orders placed in London, New York, Zurich. In the 1960s version of this drama, central bankers stared at dwindling reserves on their balance sheets as foreign investors dumped sterling. Each wave of selling forced the Bank of England to spend scarce dollars and gold to buy back its own currency, trying to show confidence by burning through its defenses. By 1967, the pressure had become relentless. Britain's trade deficit refused to shrink. Stop-go policy produced fatigue instead of dynamism. Overseas lenders and domestic investors alike began to ask the question no government wants to hear: how long can this be sustained? Every rumor, every poor economic figure, every political misstep triggered new speculation against the pound. In that environment, a crisis does not arrive all at once. It builds, subsides, and returns with greater force, like waves eroding a seawall. One bad set of numbers, one diplomatic embarrassment, one failed policy can be enough to start the next surge. Defending an unrealistic exchange rate becomes a full-time job. In November 1967, there was no strength left to pretend. After another round of selling, another flurry of emergency meetings, another desperate search for help from abroad, the British government chose the option it had spent years denying. On the weekend of November 18th or 19th, the decision was made. Sterling would be devalued from $2, $80 to $2. 40, a reduction of about 14%. To the outside world, it was presented as a technical change aimed at restoring competitiveness. To anyone who understood the symbolism, it was an admission that Britain's post-war monetary posture had been an act of theater, sustained for as long as possible and no longer. Devaluation is simple in concept. If one currency buys less of another, the country's ability to purchase goods from abroad declines. Imports become more expensive. Tourists find foreign travel costlier. Foreign currency debts become heavier. Domestic exporters, on the other hand, may find their goods more attractive in world markets, at least in the short term. A falling currency shifts the balance between those who buy from abroad and those who sell to it. In human terms, the adjustment is not abstract. It flows into supermarket prices, fuel costs, heating bills, interest rates. Even if wages rise later, there's often a period during which ordinary households feel squeezed. Their savings, denominated in the local currency, now represent a smaller claim on global value. Politicians understand this. They also understand that admitting it directly is dangerous, so they reach, once again, for language. When Harold Wilson addressed the nation after the devaluation decision, he chose his words carefully. He emphasized that the move was necessary to correct imbalances, to strengthen exports, and to secure jobs. Then came the crucial reassurance: the pound in your pocket, in your purse, or in your bank had not been devalued. Only the external value, in relation to other currencies, had changed. It was a sentence designed to draw a line between two worlds. On one side, the mysterious realm of foreign exchange markets, where the pound's price on the international stage had shifted. On the other side, the familiar realm of everyday life, where coins were still coins, notes were still notes, and bank balances still showed the same numbers. The problem is that these worlds are not separate. They bleed into each other. A shop that imports goods does not pay suppliers with symbols. It pays with actual currency at the new exchange rate. A factory that buys foreign machinery, a power station that imports fuel, a government that purchases medicine from abroad, all face higher bills after devaluation. Those costs move through the system as higher prices, reduced investment, or lower real wages. The pound in someone's pocket may look unchanged, but its reach has shortened. It can travel less distance in the world. It can command fewer foreign goods. It is a smaller key to the same global door. Wilson's phrase became famous, partly because people understood this instinctively. It sounded like a reassurance, but it also sounded like a dodge. It highlighted what governments often do in such moments: preserve the symbol and adjust the substance. The design of the notes does not change. The denomination does not change. The name of the currency does not change. but the power behind that name has been quietly reduced. Seen from afar, Sterling 1967 is one episode in a long-running pattern. Throughout history, rulers have altered the value of money while insisting that nothing essential has changed. Roman emperors debased their coins, adding base metals while keeping the same names and faces. Medieval monarchs clipped silver from the edge of coins and called it reform. Revolutionary governments flooded their economies with paper and insisted that confidence alone would sustain value. Each time, words softened the blow while reality marched on. Modern societies prefer softer terms. Instead of devaluation, there are adjustments, realignments, measures to restore competitiveness. Instead of openly debasing coinage, central banks create new money electronically and buy financial assets, calling it quantitative easing. Instead of acknowledging that inflation eats away at savings, officials speak of price stability with temporary upward pressures. The mechanism, however, is familiar. When debts are large, when competitiveness is weak, when promises made in one era no longer fit the resources of another, governments face a choice. They can default openly. They can cut spending dramatically. They can raise taxes to painful levels, or they can allow, and sometimes encourage, the quiet erosion of money's value. Of these options, the last is often the most attractive politically. Default is dramatic. Spending cuts provoke protests. Tax hikes are obvious. Inflation, devaluation, and currency drift are subtler. They work slowly or in carefully managed steps. They can be explained as responses to global conditions, as technical necessities, as adjustments no one could have foreseen. The cost is not eliminated, it is spreading. Every saver holding the currency bears a fraction. Every worker paid in that money sees a portion. Every long-term contract written in that unit silently shifts in favor of the borrower and against the lender. In 1967, the shift arrived in one visible move. In other times, it arrives in a series of smaller ones, barely noticed until the cumulative effect becomes undeniable. Sterling's devaluation also told the world something about Britain's changing position. For decades, the pound had been treated as an extension of national honor. To let it fall was seen as betrayal, yet defending it at an unrealistic level drained reserves, tied policy in knots, and forced repeated domestic sacrifices. In the end, the refusal to adjust became a symbol of weakness, not strength. By the time the official rate changed, global markets had already priced in the decline. The gesture was less a decision and more a delayed admission of what everyone could see. Inside Britain, the impact unfolded over months and years. Some exporters gained breathing room. Certain industries became more competitive. But inflation accelerated. Pressure on living standards increased. The middle class, whose savings and expectations had rested on the idea of a solid, honorable pound, discovered how quickly that idea could be revised. This is the deeper lesson of Sterling 1967. Monetary strength is not a speech. It is not a slogan. It is not a number defended at all costs on a chart. It is a relationship between promises and resources, between what a society expects and what its economy can actually produce. When those two drift too far apart, something must move. If the government refuses to adjust its promises, if it refuses to cut spending or reform its structures, then the bridge that shifts is often the currency. What survives moments like this is never the official line. Speeches fade. Phrases like the pound in your pocket are remembered mainly as warnings, not as comforts. What endures are real claims on real value. Productive assets, scarce resources, useful skills, the ability to adapt when symbols change. Anyone whose entire sense of security is built on a fixed idea of what money is worth is vulnerable to these turns. Anyone who understands that money is a claim, not a guarantee, is in a different position. When the unit changes, the underlying reality still matters. Who can make things people want? Who owns things people need? Who has flexibility when rules are rewritten? Sterling 1967, stripped of television footage and political spin, is a simple story. A country tried to live at a higher exchange rate than its economy could justify. It financed the gap with borrowing, reassurance, and delay. Eventually, the gap became too wide. The rate moved. To ease the shock, leaders told citizens that, in some mysterious way, the currency had fallen abroad but remained unchanged at home. Anytime similar language appears in the present, it is worth remembering that weekend. When officials describe inflation as transitory while it steadily erodes purchasing power, when they present money creation as a neutral technical tool, when they insist that structural imbalances require only minor adjustments, the pattern is the same. Symbols are being protected. Substance is being rearranged. The next time those reassurances are heard, a simple question cuts through the vocabulary. Who exactly is paying for this? If a debt burden is being eased, whose savings are being diluted? If competitiveness is being restored, whose living standards are being quietly cut? If a currency is adjusting downward, who is being invited to believe that the money in their pocket is untouched? History has already recorded the answers.